Brazil is a 1985 dystopian science fiction film directed by Terry Gilliam, starring Jonathan Pryce, Robert De Niro, Ian Holm, Bob Hoskins, and Ken Geist.
Break out of your dull, humdrum life and into Brazil.
You're so pleased you could make it right this way.
It's about flights of fantasy and the nightmare of reality.
We're all in this together.
Terrorist bombings.
I don't think it involves anything unsavory. You trust me, Jack?
And late-night shopping. True love.
You don't trust me?
Trust you? Trust you? The man who hijacks my truck, loses me my job, has every security man in town looking for me? Of course I trust you.
I was only trying to help.
Yeah.
And creative plumbing.
There's your problem. Can you fix it? No, I can't.
From Terry Gilliam, director of Time Bandits, Brazil. It's only a state of mind.
We're all in it together, kid.
Welcome back to the Cult of Films. I'm John, the host, and welcome back, sir, Mr. Jason Alt.
Hey, how's it going? I don't get invited to a lot of these, so it's always a pleasure when you deign to invite your co-host to co-host with you.
You class up the joint when you kind of slum it over here on the Cult of Film, so I do appreciate that. It's just this is where you go after you watch that show and you take your hair down and pop a few Xanny bars and enjoy some film. So tonight,
this is the most pretentious possible movie we could be discussing after prefacing it like that. It's
right.
Like, yeah, this is lowbrow. It's a real cerebral movie everyone hated.
Exactly.
Real schlock.
Terry Gilliam's kind of that guy, right? He's the architect of so many cult classics, Time Bandits, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Monty Python, The Holy Grail. You could literally throw a dart at his filmography and do a Cult of Films on it. But we picked Brazil. Why do we pick Brazil?
It's of his films, it's my favorite. So that's why this is the one we did. We could have done 12 Monkeys. That would have been a good choice. I picked Brazil because the theme song, Aquilera de Brazil, is such an earworm that this movie sticks with you longer than any other films he's made. It was such a good choice for the movie's theme, and the music director even made variations on the theme as part of the film. So for whatever reason, having a catchy tune made this movie stick with me, and that's what I'm going with. If you asked me why I like this more than any other of his films, it's hard for me to articulate it. Other than that, this felt kind of like his take on the boring literature you had to read in high school, but he sexed it up a little bit. So I enjoyed it.
Before we move on, we found out some interesting trivia about the actual theme song. You will all not believe what they've used that song in going forward, because I was even like, no, you know what? I've heard it in some kind of family film, and then we found out it was they used it in the Wall-E trailer. But Jason, what other movies did we find out that the theme song to Brazil was used in?
Well, I think you're setting this up specifically because you want to point out that John Williams used a couple bars of this in the Canto Bight theme song in Rian Johnson's Star Wars movie.
I thought you were fucking lying to me.
No,
there's no way.
But then when you listen to it, it's 3 or 4 bars of Aquilera de Brazil just in the Canto Bight theme song, and it's well, that's enough to be an homage, Yeah. Sean Puffy Combs got away with way worse than this. It's sampling. He sampled Aquilera de Brazil, but it's a great theme song. I could talk about that song. We don't even have to talk about the movie. You're gonna be humming Aquilera de Brazil. I'm sure I'm butchering that pronunciation. Everybody And everyone in Brazil who's listening to this cast is swearing at their computer in Portuguese right now.
Yes.
Like,
In the fictional Terry Gilliam version of Brazil, yes, everyone.
I'm sorry, I love your steakhouses. Your culture is wonderful.
Dun, 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 dun. This is actually like a standard question for like movie critics and people that were interviewing Terry Gilliam and the cast back then. It was like one of the early memes of the 1980s, especially in 1985. But what was Brazil about?
What is Brazil?
What is Brazil?
What is Brazil?
That's a very difficult one to answer.
Brazil was made in 1985 because it was the book 1984.
Fair
right?
enough. Yeah.
It was Brave New World. It was 1984. It was a lot of dystopian stuff. But I mean, Gilliam has said he didn't really intend this to be like some sort of prescient film that predicts the future.
Mm-hmm.
He was very much commenting on modern times when he made this. And anything that we read into like, oh, wow, he predicted this. It's like, no, this just means everything's been terrible. But like our parents' generation didn't really want to acknowledge it.
Yeah. He's even said in interviews that he hates that it's still so prescient to this day. He hates the fact
means we haven't learned anything.
Right. Exactly.
He's like, no, I meant Thatcher and Reagan were dog shit. Why haven't you done anything? Why do you keep electing their acolytes?
Which was an interesting topic in itself, that this was the fourth film from him. So he already had Holy Grail under his belt and Time Bandits under his belt. So, and I feel like those movies, although Holy Grail's an institution, Time Bandits kind of like walked briskly so this movie could run. I just think that he just got better and better until he got really worse and worse, and that's unfortunate, but we could talk about that later. But this screenplay was written by Terry Gilliam, but also by Tom Stoppard and Charles McCown. There was a lot of tension between Gilliam and Stoppard because they were completely on different pages. Gilliam basically paid Stoppard, and Stoppard was a well-known screenwriter back in the 80s. And so he was like, no, this is what you paid me to do. This is the story. Do it. And Gilliam's just like, well, you know what? That's the beauty of being the director also, is because I'll say I'll do whatever, but on the day, I'm just going to switch it. And that's what he did about 80% of the time.
Yeah.
So those two really butted heads over this project.
Now, as much as Gilliam had a few hits before Brazil in 1985, he very much did not have any clout in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, he's like, I made some big movies in England, doesn't really translate. And Universal was not happy with him at all. He tried to big dick Universal Studios, and they big dicked him right back. Because, as you know, the studios got a much bigger dick. So what ended up happening was he turned in a movie that was like 24 minutes longer than he said it was going to be. Like, they wanted like 2 hours 5 max, and he's like, here's 2.5. And he's like, you can't cut anything, and don't cut my bummer ending. And Universal's like, you've made 4 movies. Get out of my office. Like, they very much wanted to bury this movie. They considered just buying it for half price and just burying it. What ended up happening was Gilliam did a bunch of secret screenings for LA critics, and then the film won a bunch of LA Critics Awards, and then Universal couldn't bury it. Right, he forced their hand. Mm. This is a guy that's got 4 movies under his belt, and he's butting heads with the studio. What ended up happening was, theatrically, they cut his bummer ending and put in a real saccharine, like, no, he's not being tortured. They get away and they live happily ever after, sort of bullshit ending. And if you haven't seen that ending, it's because basically every DVD release of the film, they're like, look, this isn't what the director wanted, and the original theatrical ending is like a bonus feature on the DVD versus being the ending that you've seen. So you've seen the dystopian bummer ending, and that, like, it makes the whole movie, and it needed to be left in. But Universal was just like, all right, fine, we'll release it, but we're just going to dump it in a few small theaters and not even make a poster for it. Mm. Like, they just like, okay, contractually we're obligated to do this much, and that's all they did. And in the theaters where it was released, it did money, but it wasn't released in enough theaters for it not to lose 3/4 of its budget. So it really flopped hard, but became a cult hit, which is why we're discussing it today.
Studio shot it in the foot on purpose. Like, they wouldn't even give it a chance to be as successful as it should have been. And it probably, which was weird, because like rewatching this, even like streaming it now, you're just going to get that bleak ending, which makes the movie like, it's not Capricorn, you know, it's so much deeper than that and dreamlike. And that's what lends to it. I mean, for fuck's sake, he gets a lobotomy at the end. So it's almost more of a Darren Aronofsky ending than a, you know, whatever else came out back in 85. Almost $10 million on a $15 million budget. But, and like you said, they wouldn't even make a poster for it. And that's crazy because, you know, very ironic because it's one of the most iconic cult posters of all time. That art.
Who knows how many good projects that would be monster movies that everyone liked are just sitting, languishing on a shelf because somebody with an MBA is in charge of that. Like someone who's never taken an art class is in charge of that decision, you know? And with all the dog shit they pump out, right? They made Kangaroo Jack, and then there's like a good movie that they didn't make. So like, studios don't always know what they're doing. They're a business, and the problem with it being a business is businessmen run a business and they don't know dick about art. Yeah. So sometimes they like, we can't have a 2-hour and 30-minute movie out there, you know? So Sid Sheinberg from Universal really butted heads with Gilliam. Ended up being a compromised version of the movie because I think what Gilliam's point was that like you can't kind of wallow in your own life, you have to get involved. Where the character Sam in the movie messes up is that he falls in love, and as soon as he does that, he starts worrying about himself and he stops really being an effective agent of change, which is why he hated the saccharine ending, because it's like, no, you shouldn't be rewarded for stopping your important work and focusing on being in love. That was where you messed up. That's why you got lobotomized, you idiot.
Yeah.
So
this is an Office Space.
It wasn't just like the studio tweaked the ending. It's the studio fundamentally undermined the director's interpretation of the character he wrote.
Just what he accomplished with what he had, with all those things working against him. They had an entire set already dressed and made up. It was going to just be like really boring, four white walls, the lobotomy section. And then they were just like driving to set one day, and he sees these giant empty silos. He's like, whoa, wait a minute. We got to check this out. Goes in there.
They were exhaust chimneys from a coal burning plant.
Mm-hmm. And that makes that scene like it. And he's like, it was super dangerous. There was no walkways. We had to bring equipment like over there to that middle. He's just like, if they really knew what we were doing, they would have shut us down. But that was him back then. And it's not like Gilliam or anyone at that time could Soderbergh the shit and be like, well, fuck you. I'm just going to make a movie on my iPhone and do it my way. There was none of that back then. It was the studio or nothing. So there was no off ramp to do that. He had to do this guerrilla filmmaking style just under the darkness of night, basically.
You want to hear a hilarious prelude to that scene?
Yeah.
They demolished that coal burning plant and they put an IKEA in that place. So like, what could be more of a message that Sam lost than like, well, you tried to butt against capitalism, but we turned your brain to pudding and now people are buying meatballs where in the spot where you were tortured. Sorry, bud. Oh my
god, that's bleak. That's the most bleak part of it now.
Yeah, it's got an IRL component. Really kicking a fictional character while he's down. For sure. It's like, well, we will use capitalism to invalidate your ending and just like make it your sacrifice mean nothing, and then we are going to engage in hyper capitalism.
Yeah.
Where your body was buried. So we did it.
How depressing. This film is very dreamlike. It does that dream within a dream type deal. Kind of in the same vein, A Waking Life and Eternal Sunshine, which do a good job of capturing that kind of like state. But this film does it so probably the most realistic, where it's just like these horrible things are happening, and then like, but it lulls you into a sense of like, oh, these things are really happening, and then he kind of wakes up, or you know, that weird flying like cut-ins into something so nightmarish. And the thing that makes it so believable is when he's awake, it's probably more nightmarish. You know, his reality is more nightmarish than what's he's dreaming about. So yeah, that's what's so fun. Terry Gilliam always has done a great job of contrast like he keeps contrast in mind with his set design. So everything like really pops. Everything's very, ultra realistic, and it's like a dream state anyways. And then you add that, onto your dreamlike movie where you're sitting down at a table and you're just like eating a glob of nothing that has a picture on what you're supposed to eat, and then a bomb goes off. And it's just like, that sounds like a real dream, like that could happen, and he captures that perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that he could fly meant that he could just leave everything.
Freedom, right? Yeah.
I think a lot of the times people in their regular life, they feel like their life is pretty good, or at least manageable. So there's a part of you that kind of likes a nightmare, because when we wake up from a nightmare, you're like, oh, it's all back to normal, So the fact that these lives are so bleak, the fact that like people actually have dreams where they can escape the drudgery of their life, that's important. And I don't think a ton of people get to experience that, because if your life isn't great, it's at least pretty comfortable and like much preferable to a nightmare. So this guy's reality is his nightmare, and it's the system he's in. So like the fact that he dreams about flying, it's like he wants to be literally miles above everything. Everything's bright and white, and there's hope and possibility, and everything below is just like smoggy, and everybody's wearing gray, and it's really bleak, So the dream imagery really was 100% like the guy can't really be a good cog in the machine, because he's like, you call those people dreamers, right? Mm-hmm. Like he's always daydreaming. So like the fact that he doesn't want the society and the society doesn't want him, he works to undermine it. But what ultimately undoes him is having some happiness in his life, which is like just such a terrible message for a movie. I love it. It's like, you can escape the drudgery of your life by making things worse for everyone, unless you meet someone and fall in love, and then you're a completely ineffective agent of change, and then you're just going to get sucked back into the machine you're trying to claw your way out of, which is, it's a real downer, but like, I think the point of this movie is like, yeah, but like ultimately the life this guy's living is sort of the consequences of the lives we're all living, right? Like all modern conveniences are built on a pyramid of human misery. Like if your life is comfortable, it's because someone on the other side of the planet has to dig lithium out of a dump for 25 cents an hour. So, like the movie doesn't really gloss over that. It's like, what if the West actually had to deal with the consequences of the West's lifestyle? And it's like, oh, well, obviously everybody would hate it.
Yeah.
And it would be terrible, but that's the point the movie was making. So any dystopia, you literally have the main character be a dreamer. So the fact that this guy had to literally dream to get that point across, it was a big component of the movie. You had to show not just that he dreamed, but what he dreamed about, what was so aspirational. And for him, it was literally getting as far as possible from his life by like flirting with the stratosphere.
Well, and it's a common trope that they've used a lot in dystopian films. You think of The Road, like the father is, once the world goes to shit, he starts having these wonderful dreams of just how, the way the world was before. And so it's kind of mentally preparing him for whatever's next, because this is as bad as it gets. The road is like 3 steps up, from where everyone is in Brazil, but it's not too far off. It's
sure,
it's that mentally preparing yourself to just be like, I am trapped in this hamster cage and I can't get out, so this is my only release. The way that he made this world, where when he is awake, everything is just so sticky and claustrophobic and uncomfortable. Like everyone is pissed off and miserable. None of these like futuristic things work. Like the pancake thing is like burning his shit and throwing it at him, and like his coffee thing doesn't work. Everyone's in a hurry to get to places they don't want to be, and it's just like and this movie shows you that just like disgusting like in between, like you're in the walls, you're in the wires, you're not supposed to see any of that like in films. That's all supposed to be like off camera, but this is just like your shit doesn't work. So you literally have like handymen that are that are like antagonists because they're just there to gouge them, to charge them a bunch, to go through this horrible like rigged system of we're gonna make horrible products and then fix them so they break. So, you know, and then you think of like your dad or your grandpa being like, you know, cars were super easy, you know, they never broke down back in the day, but you know, you have your car in the shop every other day. So again, another very fucking prescient theme in the film that he.
But it was hyper bureaucracy taken to its natural conclusion. That's what was, I think, a little bit different about this Utopia. And maybe like Brave New World was like this to an extent, but like Brave New World, it was more like you don't have a destiny. Whereas in this, it was just sort of like, sure, you could leave, but where will you go? You are so dependent on this system that you hate because that's all there is. Everyone is miserable, but like they think the alternative would be worse. They crave the system because it gives them order. You know, so this is just like it's meta bureaucracy. That's sort of what this is. Everybody is part of the system, and the system just chews everybody up and spits everybody out, but like also you're a cog in it somehow. So I mixed two very similar metaphors and got lost in there. But like that's what bureaucracy does. It's a maze, and it confuses you, and everything looks the same. Everyone's wearing gray, and that's why people get lost in the labyrinth of bureaucracy the same way I did in the own metaphor I constructed.
You better recall Bob Hoskins, or better yet, Robert De Niro, to get you out of this. Yeah, and it's also the whole indictment on just like middle management in general. And it's just like, this is, again, another foretelling thing, of a very prophetic thing where it's just like you call to get anything done or fixed or whatever, you got to do a million prompts to get to someone that is just going to transfer you anyways. And that's kind of how this is. It's just like you could only, in this world, you could only hope for the very best to be like a middle manager. And that's it. You know, those two people are at the top just driving their thumb down on you. And Ian Holm is so great in this. And he's just like the quintessential like middle manager, where he's just the entire time just thinking of ways to sabotage our main character's career, even though he has an in to the elite. Like but he like Ian Holm is so like unqualified, and you know he would just be complete shit if it wasn't for him. And so he's just like, no, the whole time he's just trying to convince him to stay with him in the sewer, basically in the mail room.
Don't go, please.
A lot of that stuff kind of reminded me of the Crimson Permanent Assurance segment of Meaning of Life. You know what I'm talking about? Where like the people at the boring insurance job just like, and that's their escape. It was like almost like a shared delusion, you know, where there's like this boring insurance office is now a pirate ship, and we're just gonna go do pirate shit. Like it kind of struck me as two different fantastical ways you could take the same basic premise, which was just people are miserable being cogs in a bureaucracy. And like, you know, there were two fantastical options, you know, from that same premise. And I love that he kind of comes back to that and explores that a lot. You know, the characters that are seen as the freest are the people that basically have no support system, and their lives are chaotic and crazy. Like, look at Time Bandits, look at Baron Munchausen. You know, so like, I think he thinks people should be free, even if they have to shed some of the safety and convenience of society. And like, whether or not you agree with that, that's at least his thesis a lot. And I think Brazil does the best job of expounding on that, which is why we are discussing this and not something else.
Yeah, let's talk about performances. Jonathan Pryce, he's just, I couldn't imagine someone else playing this role. he just did so much great work back in the 80s and the 90s until he was relegated to just being Elizabeth Swann's dad in the Pirates movie and going out like a chump.
Oh, come on. He was in Game of Thrones. Give him some
For a little bit, yeah. I wish Jonathan Pryce did more. One person that did do a lot was Ian Holm. Like, before we hit record on this, we were just like going through the pages and pages of work that Ian Holm put in, and he's just absolutely fantastic in this. Kim Greist, this is our second Kim Greist film. We talked about her in Chud. You know,
I'm sure she loves that those are the two films we picked from her long acting career between 1984 and 2000.
Right. And then Michael Palin was just great. He was great in all these films. He's probably one of the most underrated actors. One of my favorite Michael Palin roles was him in
that's a profoundly hyperbolic thing to say.
Oh, come on. In A Fish Called Wanda, he great.
Is one of the best actors.
Underrated.
From Monty Python.
Okay. Fine. And then Robert De Niro and Bob Hoskins also in here.
Bobby De Niro actually didn't want to play the role he played. He wanted to play the villain.
Really?
But Gilliam talked him into playing the role he played. And you know what? I think it was for the best.
Yeah.
The character Jack Lint. I mean, I'm sure you appreciate that Michael Palin got that role.
Right.
But like Bobby De Niro would have been just fine as Jack Lint. It would have been, and maybe having an American as like the main antagonist.
Right. Yeah.
Might have worked a little bit better, but no. I mean, Palin was fine. It was, I'm not disappointed that De Niro didn't play the character Jack Lint, but yeah, that was the part he read for, and they found something else for De Niro to do, and I think ultimately having an American sort of an outsider, someone's like he looks like everyone else but doesn't sound like everyone else,
right?
Sort of immediately makes you buy him as I'm part of the resistance. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that was deliberate, but for me, every time I watch the movie, I'm like, oh, that's the guy. For whatever reason, you just trust him immediately.
Usually you would now cast the American in the evil role, but...
Well, he was undermining the system. Like, he was an enemy of the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So, like, he was a threat to the order. So, like, 100%, you know? What are we if we're not a rebellious colony that, they failed to put down?
You could tell that this film was very influential on other films like Super Mario Brothers, Fifth Element, and Dark City, which all three of those, I think...
masterpieces, right?
Well, two of them, and I'll let you all decide.
Have we done a cult of films on Super Mario Brothers?
I have.
Maybe that could be next, because...
With Ian Ian from Bad Movie Night and I talked about it.
What a good choice for a guest on that. Man, what a movie. What a film.
Yeah.
Because... if you're going to make a movie that's nothing like the source material, just make a much bigger movie than it needs to be, but also just
so extra
just have
in the
no
wrong
reference
way
for the source material whatsoever, and just go for it.
But they had a ba-bomb.
That movie was the ba-bomb.
That movie was the ba-bomb, yeah. And I felt a lot of similarities in Dark City in this as well, where Dark City's just bleak and it doesn't have any of those. I mean, sure, the comedy in here is like a clown throwing a pie in your face while telling you have cancer, but this had a little bit of yucks to it. But Dark City does not.
I can see, the aesthetic for sure. I'm gonna have to butt heads with you a little bit on that characterization of Dark City, because Dark City was very much a noir take on Art Deco, which was a little bit more of an American style. It epitomized 1930s Los Angeles. There was a lot of Art Deco in early Los Angeles, because that was just when it was really getting built up. So Art Deco is sort of the language of old Hollywood. It's orange grows and Art Deco, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what Dark City felt like to me. Whereas the aesthetic of Brazil felt very much like Industrial Revolution England, right? It was it almost felt steampunk, because it was sort of like, okay, we're still burning coal, and we never really figured out a better way than that. So like nothing really works great, because it's just a bunch of tubes and wires through everything, and it's all basically, you imagine like the heart of the city is a giant coal reactor that's fed 24/7. Right. You know,
it's built to break.
It feels it feels like not steampunk as much as like coal punk. Does that make sense as a thing?
Well, it's more like Fifth Element.
It's like steampunk but dirty. Because steampunk is like, we invented airships in the Victorian England, and this is sort of like, we figured out a way to make coal power well into the 1980s, and everybody has like different forms of lung cancer and everyone's dirty all the time, but we never had to figure out nuclear power, so we did it. So I think the aesthetic in this was very much Industrial Revolution England. So like, I'm sure Dark City was influenced, but Dark City was very much a take on old Hollywood, and this was very much a take on old London. So, you know, I mean, dark is dark, noir is noir. You know, they're two different starting points, and they're, I guess, ultimately two different ending points. But I think the approach was the same, and I think that's what you latched onto.
Yeah, and I think a better, just as far as comparing the cityscape to Fifth Element, where Bruce Willis lives, like everyone's run out of room, right? So everyone just builds up, and that's happening now. That's happening in Seoul, in South Korea. That's happening in Seattle, where I live. You know, there's no more room to do new development or plots, so you just have to keep going up and up and up, and that's what happens. You know, these are giant apartments. It's like Mega City 1 from Dredd. You know, everything is just super tall and hard to maintain, very cold and bricky, and it's just feels like everything was just built in a rush, and there's no way to maintain anything as far as order or, you know, no checks and balances anymore. It's all, you know, just go through the turnstile. It's all middle, you know, take it up with middle management that you can never get a hold of.
I feel like the movie Equilibrium was influenced by this kind of take a lot. Mm-hmm. As much as Equilibrium was sort of like one of those movies that you really loved in your 20s and you're embarrassed by now, because it's like, oh boy, it's people shooting each other in the face. You did it. You made another movie where people shoot each other in the face.
I still like it.
But like everybody wearing the drab colors and everything like that, it felt like an attempt to kind of capture some of this movie's aesthetic. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be surprised to hear the people that made Equilibrium say this movie was an influence. I feel like it influenced a lot of dystopian films that came after. And the fact that this was made in 1984, I feel like it was not an accident.
I guess the most pressing question of the night is, and I don't know how to answer it, so I'm gonna throw it on you. How would you pitch Brazil to a person under 30 years old to watch today if they've never seen it?
What if the guys from Monty Python made 1984?
There you go.
Right, you know that book you had to read in English class? Well, it's back in POG form. Like, it's, I think if you understand the language of this film, it opens you up to be receptive to so much more stuff of this ilk, right?
Right.
I felt like
Gilliam in general, right?
Yeah, Gilliam in general, certainly. But I also feel like Lynch too. Mm-hmm. I felt like this was a gateway to David Lynch for me.
Okay.
Because like, even if you didn't quite get it, you wanted to, I guess. I don't know. There's just so much stuff. I watched terrible movies to make fun of them when I was in high school, and when I went to college, I bothered to at least give stuff a chance, right? And so Brazil was one of those movies that I saw early in college, and like, I think if you at least want to like this movie, it'll send you down a path where like you discover other stuff that was made, you know, to kind of make a point the way this movie was. Mm-hmm. I'm maybe I tried too hard not to sound pretentious about it, because I really just think this is, it's ultimately, you know, it's not that pretentious a film. So
no,
I don't want to. I don't want to read too much into it. I don't want to be like the English teacher that's like, oh, Fahrenheit 451 is clearly about censorship. And Ray Bradbury's like, no, I wrote the book about how people watch too much TV.
But I think that's what the problem was back then, though, because I think that there was an air of people thought, like maybe one like idiot saw it and just like, oh, I just didn't get it at all, and shit was happening, and people were eating oatmeal, and then like it got this buzz of being pretentious. But yeah, like you said, it's not a pretentious film whatsoever. Like Denis Villeneuve, which I think is like a gateway to Gilliam now. Like if you're young and you start with like Blade Runner 2049, or you could go back and probably enjoy Gilliam movies then.
This wasn't my first Gilliam movie. 12 Monkeys was my first Gilliam movie. So, I don't know. I think this best exemplifies kind of his take on society. So, I feel like
most political film.
Yeah, I felt like I got more out of 12 Monkeys having watched it after having seen this the first time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, like, I do think this is a good place to start. So, like, I think if someone under 30 were to give this movie a chance, I think the path that they should take watching other stuff will become clear. But also, there's probably no wrong way to do it. Because I think digesting this film will recontextualize some stuff you saw earlier, especially if it's from Gilliam.
Mm-hmm. Either way,
that sounded pretentious. Shit, I'm sorry. See, the guy made a bunch of dick jokes in Monty Python too. Let's not pretend.
There's a scene where they're pulling an old lady's face in this. Isn't that funny? Ha ha ha. Yeah, I don't know.
It's not a steeply stupid movie either. It's like it's I don't know.
It's hard. It makes you seem pretentious, but it's not a pretentious movie.
No, it's not. And I don't want to sound pretentious about it because it's enjoyable. But also, I felt like maybe recontextualize is the wrong word, but like I feel like I looked at some of Gilliam's work and some of the stuff I liked as a high schooler in a different light after this. I went from someone who would have said Big Lebowski was his favorite Coen Brothers movie to someone who said Miller's Crossing was his favorite Coen Brothers movie.
Sure, yeah. I went from someone that watched Joe versus the Volcano, then watched Brazil, and then watched Joe versus the Volcano for the very first time, if that makes sense.
And still hated it because that movie is profoundly boring.
Is that my Hudson Hawk? I love that movie.
Yeah, maybe Joe versus the Volcano is the American Brazil.
That movie fucks. All right, well, what did you think of Brazil? What do you think about Terry Gilliam in general? Leave us a comment in the section below. Tell everyone that we're talking about films, cult films, and all kinds of films. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This will be uploaded to all the podcasting sites as well. Leave us comments there. Jason E. Alt, thank you so much for classing up the joint. Where can everyone find you?
I'm Jason E. Alt on the Twitter, and if you check out my pinned tweet, it has links to all the other projects I work on around the internet. Some of them you may like, some of them you may not, so why list them here?
I am at John the Host. You could also follow this very show at The Cult of Films. Stay tuned because we have some really cool different stuff coming under the Cult of Films banner for people that might like gaming and stuff. So yeah, a little teaser there. Until next time, do we have any Brazil outs?
Football! Dude, I don't know. I don't want to.
We'll see you next time.